Welcome back. In this video I'll get started on wiring up the Motogadget unit. So there's some of the original wiring I need to keep. I've got a heap of new wires there and I'm going with the Motogadget M unit blue. Great little unit, solid state, and it gets rid of all the relays and makes the wiring much tidier. Also bought the Motogadget wiring loom just to make it a bit cleaner, and I'll use that for the majority of the new wiring. And there's a new battery, so I went with Motobat. It's a glass matte battery, should have the longevity that I'm looking for. And I've got the Yamaha manual that I'll just use as a reference for the wiring diagram. So there's the rectifier that you need to keep, and the other unit here is the ignition module. It does look a bit messy, but essentially there's only a couple of wires that need to be maintained. So here's a wiring diagram of the basics that you need, and this is the part that I'm going to wire up first. So essentially just everything I need to get the engine running. First up, I'll just put the coils in. Now the coils layout is not that logical, and the book doesn't describe this very well. So the right coil has a grey feed wire and the left coil has the red feed wire. And once they're set up, you need to make sure that the leads go to the right place. So the left coil goes to spark plug number 1 and number 4, and the right coil goes to 2 and 3. Once I had the coils in, I just drilled a hole here and tapped it out with a 6mm in a solid part of the frame, because this is where I've added a good earthing point. So I just tap this out. I grind the back of it to make sure I've got really good contact, and then I lay that earth wire. So I'll just show you how I crimp these. So pretty straightforward, but peel a bit off, put the crimp on. Now this crimper here is very old. I think it's the same one Noah had on the Ark, but it works great, and you can see that it is going nowhere. And then once I do that, I'll just put a bit of heat shrink on it, and that's job done. And just repeat this a number of times. So again, before it goes into the bike itself, I'm just putting or cleaning the surface there with a die grinder to make sure there's really good contact and earth. So I tighten that up. The other end goes onto the frame, and then I start putting the battery box in. So you can see just on the left there, I'm using a starter coil with fuse built in. So that's the only fuse essentially that's going to be between the battery and the Motogadget. Now this cable here is the positive that goes from the starter to the starter motor, and this bottom one goes to the battery. So that's essentially the starting circuit. And again, just cut these to length, and then they're ready to go. Quick coat of paint on the storage compartment, put that in there and start mounting up the ignition module and the rectifier on there for the last time. And then I put the Motogadget unit in place. I use a bit of medium strength Loctite on these just to make sure they don't come undone, and I've got good connections. And at this point I decide I'm going to put the carby boots on. So I bought a genuine set because the ones I had were getting a bit old. So just put those 4 on. They just got gaskets that obviously between them and the head bolt up pretty easy, and that is ready to put the carbies on. The other thing I'm going to do is put a little charger unit here, dual charge USB for the phone, and you can see where the speedo is. There's no ignition key because I'm going to get rid of that and use the M lock, which is just the RFID unit, and it means you don't need a key. Now Motogadget didn't do too well with this in my opinion, because they didn't give a bracket or anything, so I've had to make my own little holder for that unit, and I'm going to weld that into one of the side covers so it's nice and neat. So there it is, just slides in, and I drill a couple of holes in it after I part it off, and then, as I say, a bit later I'll weld that into the side cover. that's what it's going to look like. So it's going to be quite neat. You'll hardly see it from the outside. And I just start doing the wiring for that as well. And then what I do is wire that into the M unit itself. So when you put the battery feed in on the M unit, you need to use a bit of Loctite, as I'm doing here. So that's the positive feed. I use a bit of braided heat shrink, which just makes it look a bit tidier on the earth side, and earth that, and then just powering it up here for the first time. So when you do that, all the lights flash, just showing that it is getting a signal. And then once I've done that, then I've got to teach the RFID key. So you put the master one over, and then you've got to be within about 3 centimeters with the other key, put the master back over it, and it's basically programmed. Now when I apply the key, you get the sequence, and there it's pretty much ready to start. Well, that's the wiring pretty much done on the engine and the ignition system. I've got a few other things to do, so I'm just putting the carbies on here. I need to top the engine up with oil. I need to put the exhaust on and do some other checks. And in the next video, I'll try to start this engine for the very first time. Stay tuned.